extinguish the Ham Lake fire, which burned 75,000 acres and nearly 150 buildings over just 2 weeks.
Yeah, the new book, Gunflint Burning, Fire on the Boundary Waters, recounts the dramatic events surrounding one of the largest wildfires in Minnesota history. And joining us this morning is the author of Gunflint Burning, Minnesota native Carrie Griffith. Good morning, Carrie.
Good morning, Keith. Thanks.
What a story with all of this. And it's you know, we go from this past story that's about Minnesota history in the 1800s and things sound familiar, to this was, for us and for a lot of folks that were around 11 years ago, this was recent news. What brought you to this story?
Well, that was part of the reason. I mean, it's a contemporary story,
Yeah.
and it was quite the seminal event. It happened in almost 11 years ago today. In fact, the gentleman who started the fire went into the woods 11 years ago today. But it was a huge fire. It burned 76,000 acres. It was the largest forest fire in almost a century in Minnesota. It caused $100 million in damage. The firefighting costs alone were $12 million. So for all of those reasons, I thought it was a really compelling subject for a book, and that's why I tackled the book.
And you just dropped some of the figures of the damage and whatnot. What type of research went into this? I would imagine you spoke with the people who lived through this, the firefighters who were each, for weeks dealing with this.
I did, yeah. In the book, I acknowledge over 60 people. I interviewed 100 people. I interviewed cabin owners. It burned 144 structures. Most of those were cabins. All the firefighters that were involved, or a significant number of them that were involved in the first days of the fire. At one point, there were more than 1,000 firefighters on the fire. But yeah, it took an enormous amount of research time and interviews, and I talked to a wide assortment of people. Great people up there, phenomenal people, and I was really struck with their altruism, and a lot of them were volunteers, so it made for a very compelling story.
And this was one of those situations, too, where it was just a confluence of not only events, but of previous conditions, of weather conditions, of things that had happened 8 years previous. I worked up in Duluth when the blowdown occurred back in '99, and that was the major fuel source for that fire. All of those trees that were just sitting there waiting for something to happen to them. And some folks say, this is nature's way of cleaning that up, but it wasn't nature's way of starting it.
No, it wasn't. It was actually, as forest fires in Minnesota go historically, this was the 12th largest fire. It was the largest in almost a century, but it was the only fire of all 12 that was started by a campfire. So that made it really interesting. And that gentleman, Stephen George Posniak was his name, he was actually, in the way a lot of people say there were no fatalities in the fire. I think of it a little differently. Steve Posniak died a little over a year after the fire from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, right after his lawyer tried to dismiss two of the 3-count indictment against him. So
for starting the fire.
Yeah, for starting.
Because if he was up there in the first place, he loves it up there.
Yes.
And if you're in the boundary waters, you don't just wander in the boundary waters and don't love it. You will have to be, and for him to have been, that would have taken a toll on him. Obviously it did.
Oh, it did. This, it wasn't his first rodeo. This was his 27th year going into the boundary waters. So he loved it. Yeah. And I think it really gnawed on him. It wasn't only, in Minnesota, if you're found guilty of a felony starting a forest fire, you're liable for damages. So he was looking at being liable for $100 million in damages. And I think that weighed on him too. But really, he loved the North Woods. It was just, to your point earlier, Keith, the conditions were perfect. High winds, drought conditions, really bad. And
Keith had mentioned, if you're from here, if you lived here when that happened, you heard about it, we've seen the video, we're showing some of the final video from earlier. You remember this, but these people lived it every single day. The people that you were talking to, maybe it was their own cabin, or it was their loved ones who were out there fighting this. Obviously, this kind of became, not their identity, I don't want to say that, but this became their life for weeks on end.
Oh yeah, and hopefully the book captures that, because in fact I opened the book with a scene of a man defending his cabin, and it was a significant event. A lot of these people sort of had PTSD after the fire was over. But the way everybody came together to fight this fire was really a big part of the remarkable story.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's
Look at that.
fascinating. Carrie, thank you very much. Carrie Griffith joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Gunflint Burning comes out next Tuesday. He's going to be signing books, talking to the folks. Scout and Morgan Books on May 10th and Subtext Books on May 23rd. Go check it out. You can also get more information at upress.umn.edu.
Good job,
The
honey.
Jason Show is